Hi, everybody. And I am just so excited and so thrilled to introduce Olaolu Ogunyemi. You know what, when I was on, I ran into your book, and this is what intrigued me to get a hold of you. And I just found even just the title alone was really intriguing. So I would just like to introduce Olaolu. He is a loving husband and father, teen mentor, and U.S. Marine officer. Olaolu has a deep passion for working with children, fueled by an unended supply of energy and imagination. I just love that. Since he was young, Olaolu has been nicknamed the life of the party because he pours his exuberant personality into everything he does. As the fifth of 6 children, he's intimately familiar with the bond that forges during quality time, during story time. Thus, Olaolu was inspired to start writing children's stories to help create loving and memorable family moments. He is the author of the Amazon's bestseller book, Crow from the Shadow. I love that title. And #1 new release, Horse the Horsefly. Olaolu writes and speaks in simple, understandable language and is in an entertaining style that keeps listeners and readers hooked while learning vital lessons about virtual. And he speaks pretty much, by the sounds of it with your books, you speak where it's very easy to understand. And by understanding too, it's really easy for parents and teachers to be able to teach different aspects of your book, which is really, really important because being able to read a book and engage our children is one thing, but to be able to take a lesson from it is huge, especially nowadays with COVID, isolation. There's so much anxieties and worried and just the unknown for our children, including us as parents. So I'd like to ask a little bit, what was your journey going into writing this book?
Absolutely. So first of all, thank you so much for having me. This is an excellent opportunity. I've been so excited about it. Now that exuberant personality, I'll try to bring it down and just relax so that way I can be able to communicate what I want to talk to you all about. But the journey to get to writing my first book, specifically Crow from the Shadow, I feel like there was more of a lifelong journey because throughout the book, you present what's being presented there is life challenges. And I think a lot of us would relate to it, as we'll talk a little bit about it later. But there's a lot of life challenges that are presented in the book that I think I was able to create as a product of my upbringing, a product of some of the things that I was able to overcome as a child and even as an adult. So I think my journey to writing this book started off about 2018. I was doing a lot of commuting. And I was starting to think, okay, I need to, instead of just, listening to music, and music is great, I'm a musician myself, but instead of just listening to music, I wanted to do something that was stimulating my brain and sort of allowing me to decompress while allowing me to sort of pour into something else. So then I started thinking about ways that I could do that. And it started off listening to podcasts. And then it transitioned to, sort of listen to audiobooks and trying to see how many books I can read and comprehend throughout the day. And then it started transitioning to, oh man, maybe I can create my own thing, where I can sort of sit down and enjoy time with my children. And I think that's really what sort of brought this book to life, or brought writing to life for me, is that I realized that some of the best moments in my life, as you said in the bio, were just those quality story times, those memorable moments that were created by my mom and my dad when they sat down and they read with us. Especially my mom, she would sit down. You want to know where that personality came from? It came directly from her, because we'll sit down and she would, whether it's Dr. Seuss, or whether, it doesn't matter. I could just remember her just being so excited and so exuberant. And it really made us interested in reading and getting to understand why reading is important and why it's fun. So I think all that together sort of created this will and this desire within me to create my own stories that I can share with my children, first of all, and then I can share with the world, so people can now see a young man who's going out and he's creating moments with his children that they can go ahead and replicate for themselves, and they can create those same kind of moments with their children. So I think in and of itself, I think that's the journey that brought me to writing Crow from the Shadow. And I know we'll talk a little bit more about it later.
Yeah, so it sounds like you get a lot of your energy from your mom. It sounds like
Oh, yeah.
you're the fifth of six kids, so your mom had her hands full,
Oh,
and
yeah.
just amazing that, she could bring all that excitement through reading,
Mhm.
expression, like you say, to Dr. Seuss and everything. I think that's absolutely amazing. I would actually love to meet your mom.
Oh, absolutely. And I'm sure she would be more than happy to meet you. I mean, she was one, like I said, she always brought energy. And it was funny because, as I told you before, I grew up in Louisiana, and we grew up in a rural part. So we sort of didn't fit in a little bit there, right? So my dad came from Nigeria. My mom came from Boston. And then they met and they moved down to Louisiana. We grew up there. So all of our accents just did not fit in, whether we start saying things that lean more towards a Nigerian accent, or whether it's like mom, who comes from Boston, which that's a different kind of accent. And she was a speech language pathologist as well. So all the ways that she talked and did things was always interesting to me. And she'll go to our sports games, and where everybody else is yelling and they're having a good time, when she yelled, it was always distinct because again, she's always full of energy, but she was always extremely proper in the way she pronounced everything, and wherever everybody may be saying, "Oh, go get the ball," and she's like, "Get that ball." And we just always laugh because it's like, Mom, maybe just leave off a couple of L's here and there. We're in Ruston, Louisiana. But anyway, that I think that is just something that we learned to feed off of, something that we grew to enjoy. And if you look at all my brothers, my wife even asked me she asked me just recently. She's like, "Why do you always, like, right before bed?" It just seems like that's when we all have this spike of energy that we have to release at the end of the day. And I'm the ringleader. I would love to say that it's just my children, but I am the ringleader. And I think that just comes from that story time. You're just having fun and embracing the moment. And then it becomes a little harder to calm the children down. But it is cool to have that moment of just enjoyment and just enjoying the moment, enjoying each other and having a good time.
Yeah.
Just knowing that we can laugh, and there's gonna be times we have to cry and we have to lean on each other, but there's gonna be a lot of laughter and a lot of times we can just enjoy life. And I think that's what my mom provided us. My dad, on the other hand, he's also very fun. If you meet him, you see his face, he seems pretty stoic, but behind the scenes, no, that's just not him. He's all about education. He made sure that we stayed in school. He made sure we stayed focused on achieving, not quitting anything that we started, just focused on achieving success no matter what we do. So it was a really good blend between my mom and dad, just to try to set us all up for success.
Well, it sounds like they've done a great job
Oh,
because
thank you.
the book, especially your bestseller that is out now, because I don't think your other one is out yet by the sounds of it. Has
Not yet, no.
No, that's right. So The Crow from a Shadow, I absolutely love that title. There's a couple of questions I have in that title. I'd like to know, what is the book about and where did you get the title from?
Absolutely. So I'll start off with what the book's about. So the book is, there's a crow, obviously that's the main character, which is not a likely character, but I'll talk a little bit more about why I chose a crow. But there's a crow who wants to be, he can be a professional athlete, he wants to be a military officer, he wants to do all these great things. But then there's this counter to everything that he wants to do. So he says he wants to be a military officer, but he wants to play basketball, but he wants to do all these things. He wants to get great grades in school, but ... The shadow tells him that he cannot do it, right? And I think for me, and this is what gets into where the title came from. For me, I realized that there's always this force, this thing that comes against us that tells us that we cannot do, or we should not do something that we really want to do, or we know that we're put on this earth to do. And this is really heavy for children. And sometimes we don't think to reinforce this until we start getting older and we realize, oh, wait, we can start telling ourselves this. But really, at a young age, if we can get the message across for the children, like in Crows from Shadow, is that we control our own destiny. That's really what the whole story is about. Because as he goes through all these things that he enjoys, all these things that he loves, all these things that he wants to do, he finally gets to the end. He realizes, wait, you know what? I am talented. I do have what it takes. And then he says, only one can determine my future, and that one is me. And really, that's what the book is all about. It's just trying to bring that message to life that we all have something within us. We all have purpose. We all can be great, but we cannot listen to that shadow, whatever that opposing force is. And then it was cool to see. I left the shadow pretty vague, right? I said, crow from the shadow, because some may say, okay, what is the shadow? And I always left it vague for that reason. So from the shadow could be a place. Some people say, where you're from this area, well, statistically proven that you're not going to do X, Y, and Z. Some it's their last name. Some it's, what mistakes they made in the past. Some it may be COVID-19. To some, it may just be the toxic environment that they're in. But the shadow takes many forms in all of our different lives. And, it was cool when I started getting feedback from the book when it came out initially. So a lot of the initial feedback was really cool, because I would ask people, hey, what is the shadow? Specifically, I wanted to ask children. But one of the most interesting answers that I received, because children would tell me anything, it's the voice in my head that tells me to do wrong things, and I was like, wow, that's pretty profound. Some were saying that, it was X person that told them they'll never be anything. But what was the most interesting answer that I got was from a parent, the mom. She said, I realized after reading a book with my child that I am my child's shadow. And I was like, wow, that is really profound, right? Because without thinking about it, we can easily tell our children or do things in front of our children that causes them to believe that they cannot do X, Y, and Z, the things that they believe that they're destined to be. So that's what Crow from the Shadow is all about. It's just, again, removing whatever that opposing force is, whether that is a person, or whether that's a place, or whether that's a thing. It's removing that opposing force from our way to let us know that we can be successful.
I really like what you said. There's a couple things in there I'd like to really touch on. I really, really liked about the opposing shadow is that you're also saying it's like the little boy inside of him says he is his destiny, and it took him time to figure that out. And the thing is what happens with our kids, especially, I'll just take an example. If they're in school and they feel like a failure, they stop doing what they want to do. So all these different anxieties start building up inside of them, and they start talking. The shadow starts telling them they can't do it.
Mm-hmm.
I like also how you said, and you mentioned about parents, like parents could actually be the shadow, because we could either be the shadow causing the anxieties and the angsts in our children, or we could be the shadow that's actually helping them through their anxieties or their toxicity. Because like you're saying, the toxicities around us in the environment right now, especially with COVID, and anxieties are just gone over the roof, not just with our kids, but our parents, and the parents not understanding how to support our kids.
Mm-hmm.
So in saying that, the book sounds like it's got so many good pieces to it. What are some of the greatest resources that you've heard, that you've had feedback that has been really usable to help support these parents with their kids, or just helping the kids work through the shadow?
Right. So I think one of the biggest things, so first thing that I always did, I like to tell people is I put questions in the back of the book, and it's called Continue the Conversation Questions. And essentially those questions are what I put in the back of the book to allow parents to, number one, recognize their children's feelings. That's the first thing. Understand that your children do have feelings, they do have emotions, understand that they have all kinds of things that are going on. They're real human beings, and stress is not reserved for when you turn 18 or 21, right? So things are happening in their lives that we have to recognize and we have to accept. That's the first thing. And as you go through some of the continued conversation questions, now you're really engaging. And as we talked about before, we're teaching that child to connect with those feelings and connect with those emotions by having them to relate to a character that's in the story. Not only that, but again, from an educational standpoint, we're allowing the child to have some kind of reading comprehension, which we always want from a child when we're reading stories. So resources that I always, again, I recommend is I always tell people, counseling is key. Counseling is key. A lot of times I think we look at counseling as more of a reactive thing or more, oh, I need a counselor, because something happened in my life and I need a counselor to get through this. But a lot of times I really believe it's like emergency, for example. It's the little packets of vitamin C that they tell you to take. It's funny that we don't realize that a lot of those things say for daily use, right? Not just when you get sick. It's used, your vitamins are good for you over time, right? And it helps you build your immune system because you're feeding your body or you're giving your body the most important things. Well, it's the same thing for your mind. As you continue to feed your mind all these great things, whether it be from a counselor, or whether it be from whatever spiritual fitness or health that you believe in, or mental health that you believe in, we make sure that we're connecting to that and growing ourselves. So I think those are the biggest things that number one, understanding ourselves and being able to be there for our children. And then number two, connecting with professionals that can tell you, hey, for example, hey, sit down with your children and have them connect to their feelings and all those kind of things like we talked about in one of your previous sessions. And it's those kind of things, I think, those resources that exist so that way we can, as parents, can grow and then in turn teach our children the same thing that we're learning, because we're all learning. I really believe that it's a continual learning process for parents. And I believe that it's our job as we are learning to guide our children as well.
Exactly. And I like how you said you put some questions at the back of the book so that those questions could help parents guide them on how to help their children.
Exactly. Yeah. So I'm gonna flip it open right now so I can read some of the questions. So for one, it says, how would you describe Crow? And that's just one question. That's sort of what I'm trying to do with that question, is get the child to understand who Crow is, help them understand what Crow is talking about, what kind of emotions he may be going through. And then of course, help them understand how they may relate to Crow. So that's the first question. And then the second question is, now, how would you describe the shadow? And that's where the parent gets an opportunity to see, what is the shadow? Like, what does a child think? At the younger group, because the range is from about 6 to 9-year-old is where the target range for this book. The younger crew at the 6-year-old range, maybe they don't say the most profound answer, right? And even the 9-year-olds may not say the most profound thing. But as you talk to them and they start understanding, the more they relate to Crow, the more they understand who the shadow may be or what the shadow may be for them, right? So you start asking them, how would you describe the shadow? And then the next question is, what changed throughout the story? So what I'm trying to get them to understand there is, how did Crow go from being the guy who is being, sort of oppressed by this shadow to being the guy that realizes that the shadow he doesn't control me. The shadow is just another thing that's out there that's opposing me, that cannot win, it cannot control me, it cannot tell me what to do. And then lastly, what is the most important part of the story? And again, I leave those questions pretty vague because again, I want the parent to guide their child. I want the parent to take those questions and sort of talk through it with them. For example, my son, when he was 7, I wrote this book when he was 7. And when I asked them, hey, so tell me about Crow. Who is Crow? And it was just funny as he sort of described me, because I asked she's 12 now, but I asked my 11-year-old the same question. Her answer was completely different from his. She said Crow is like this, he's just like a normal person. That's my 11-year-old, then 12-year-old said. He's just a normal person. He's just an average person who's trying to succeed in life. Whereas my 7-year-old is like, hey, Crow's a bird, he's a bird that's, just trying, he wants to play sports. And for some reason, he keeps listening to this person who's telling him not to, And it's just funny, again, to see how they sort of comprehend things and how they're observing life. And again, their experiences make them who they are. My son being the one who's like, okay, why is he listening to him? Whereas my daughter is like, I understand why he's listening to him, but he should. And in the end, we had the same message. No matter whether he's like, I don't understand why he's even listening to him, he shouldn't listen to him, or they're saying, yeah, I understand why he's listening to him. In the end, the answer is the same, that we cannot listen to those things that are opposing us and stopping us from being successful.
Exactly. And I kind of like how they all have a different perspective of it, but they come back with some really thoughtful ideas.
Mhm.
And I think this is really good for getting kids who are stuck. So
Mhm.
There's a lot of kids that are stuck in their head thinking, like I was talking earlier about being a failure, or if they feel left out and alone because they're thinking that these kids don't like me. So
Mhm.
and they start these anxieties. They don't want to go to school because they feel like they don't fit in. And there you go. That's the shadow, crow and shadow. And I think that's a really good way to help kids build resilience, to
Right.
see inside them exactly what is it that's stopping me from moving forward.
Mhm.
And when you said to about 9 years old, you wrote this book for, but I think it's really good for parents too.
Oh yeah,
So
absolutely.
you can really think deep in how to build resilience in children, but we as parents need to build resilience in ourselves as well. Because again, like the toxic environment that we're in right now, there's so many of us, it's pretty scary out there. And a
Right.
lot of people, you know, are kind of like, there's so much media and what's going through their head, and it plays around like a record and you get stuck. So
Mhm.
I really feel like this is a really good resource for, I mean, you could even tap it down for the little ones. You said from 6 until 9. But when I've been working with some little kids that are in kindergarten, they're having a tough time too. So I would even probably say, with those questions at the back, the parents could actually relate it to what the child's anxieties are. Like, for instance, that shadow underneath the bed, they won't go to bed. It's kind of scary and they won't sleep in their bed. Well, what's that shadow? Let's take a look at that shadow. So I think the concept that you're sending out there is absolutely amazing and really needed, especially for right now. I really do believe it because there's so much anxieties, and that's great having the questions at the end as well.
Right. And I think that's one of the things, because somebody pointed this out and they talked about for them, the shadow was depression. And I had there quite a bit. And it was just very interesting to see how many times people related, even children were relating the shadow to depression or to anxiety and those kind of things. And I think one of the best analogies that I could come up with is the purpose of this book is to shine a light on the shadow, because that's what makes the shadow go away, right? It's to shine a light on them, to say, hey, this is a real thing, right? This is really happening. Like you said, with the monsters under the bed. Well, the first thing that I do when somebody says there's a monster under my bed or in my closet is I take a flashlight and I shine in there on all the things that are in there, right? So what is it that's casting a shadow that's making you scared in the closet? Let's identify it. Oh, yeah, it's just your jacket. Look, it's your jacket. You love this jacket, and it's those kind of things that now the child's saying, oh man, that is my favorite jacket. That closet's not scary at all. I just put my favorite jacket or my dresses in, my princess dresses, whatever it is in there. And I think that's really what it's all about. It's really shining the light on those things that really come to us. And I like how you pointed out, actually, I had a 5-year-old that sort of reached out, and it struck home for me because one of the guys I grew up with, it happened to be his nephew. And a little bit about myself, background is I was one of the only ones that graduated other than my family. With the guys I hung out with, I was one of the only ones that graduated high school. When I mean one of the only ones, I was like the only one. And that didn't end up in the system, right? And for me, when I look back at that, I say, man, that is a lot of talent. There's a lot of guys. I mean, when you talk about really talented in leadership and music and sports and you name it, I mean, welding, whatever it may be, they're super talented individuals, but they were never able to tap into that talent for whatever reason. So it was really profound when I hear this guy's cousin, he looks just like him too. It's funny because I like flash back to when we were growing up, like, I met him in second grade and we sort of grew up together. And it was really cool to see him say, the shadow for me lets me know that I can do my own thing, is the way the 5-year-old say, I can do my own thing. I can do my own thing. And and it's just funny to hear him say that, but it was encouraging to me to know that he understood that, what, he can succeed. If he wants to, whatever he wants to be, he has the ability to determine what that is. He has ability to determine his trajectory. So it was just cool to see that reaction from a 5-year-old who he basically had just turned 5 when he read the story. But I give kudos to his mom too, who sat down with him and helped him read, because it's a rhyming story. But he still needed help reading through it because, again, it was a little bit, some of the words maybe a little bigger. But it was cool to have her sit down and read through it with him and explain to him, okay, what do you think it means? and now start talking through them. So every time she thinks about it, every time it comes, and this is why another reason I use the crow as a character, every time you see a crow outside, which we see a lot of them, we got to start thinking, instead of saying, oh man, that thing's going to tear through my trash, maybe we start thinking, oh man, I determine my own future, no matter what's going on in my day, no matter how dark or ominous the situation may seem, which we know crows to be, depending on what you believe, crows have always been those birds. They're like more ominous in nature. They're dark, they're scary, they're again, everyone wants to go through the trash. They just tear up stuff. So it's having a character that's like, that we already see all the time and that we think to be dark and scary, now bringing a shining a new light to me, that helps me to remember, even when I see a crow that says, oh man, you know what? No matter what's happening, no matter how much this COVID stuff is going on, or no matter how dark a situation may seem, whether, for military, if you're on deployment or whether you're in a home with your families and things aren't going well, no matter how dark the situation is, you have the power to change that situation. And again, you go out, get the help that you need, get the resources that you need, and bring that to help you overcome those things.
Absolutely. And I like how you said the resources too, because there are so many resources that we can tap into. I know that there's a waiting list to see, doctors and psychologists, and it's really hard to get in right now because of what's going on in the world, but there really is some really good tools that we could use. And I know you and I went through one in our last meeting about just the breathing. And it's amazing if we could just tap into some of those tools, but use them on a regular basis, and not use it when we're scared, when that shadow is coming about, but use it, to practice. And then when we notice the shadow, it's like, oh, okay, I can actually deal with that shadow.
Right.
And I think it's a really, I really love the concept of the book, because it really taps into being able to change that thought. Because if we can change our pattern of thinking of fear and anxiety and things are scary out there, and we can change it to a positive thought, we can overcome a lot of that and build resilience. Because that book is really powerful for building resilience in our children.
Right. And I think you hit the nail on the head. You're talking about essentially practicing to change those things. And I think that's one thing that gets discouraging. We try something one time, as we were discussing before. We try something one time and then we sort of let it go. In reality, we cannot allow ourselves to do that. If we really want to be resilient, we have to make a habit out of these things and make a practice out of these things. And just trying these, when these professionals like yourself, when you're bringing these things to the table, making sure that we're not only just doing it one time, one and done, because there's no magic pill. There's no way, it's not going to fix overnight. A lot of things that happen, to include COVID, a lot of things that happen are just not going to resolve overnight. That means that all the anxiety and all the stress and all the things that have happened over these last 2 years, they're not just going to disappear because, you read a children's book and your child can rhyme and you're happy now. No, these are things we have to start practicing. We have to start practicing, breathing and understanding their feelings and teaching them to connect with their emotions. We have to start practicing going out and talking to professionals if they're available. But that's the most important thing. You hit the nail on the head when you talked about, you cannot wait until the shadow is coming. If you're there, then yeah, you can fight your way through it. But you can't wait till the shadow is coming before you decide to train. And that's something I told my Marines all the time. I would much rather train 100 times for a contingency and it never happened than to meet the contingency and never ever train for it, because that's the worst thing that you can ever have, the worst thing that you can ever do. So always train, always practice getting better, always train, like building that mental toughness, not just physical, but that mental, that spiritual, that emotional, all those things are important to make you a truly healthy person.
Exactly. And I like how you say train, even if it doesn't happen, you're ready for it to happen. And to build resilience is huge in all of us, let it be a child or an adult or even an elderly person, because we kind of we do slip back in that dark hole once in a while. So it's kind of really good to keep that in the back of our minds and keep being proactive and training and practicing, because our brain is a muscle and we know that muscle has memory. And if we don't use our muscle, then we're going to lose it. And I think I talked to you about before, if we need to have empathy for ourselves and empathy for others in order to keep that brain resilient and moving forward. Because if we get sucked back into poor me syndrome, we get that turning wheel starts happening again. So being able to, have compassion for yourself, have empathy for you and others, especially for others, it helps build that muscle in that brain.
Mhm.
Will help us get out of this dark, dark hole.
Exactly.
You do have other books. Are they, especially the new one that's coming out, is it on the same concept? Is the line has the same message coming out, or does it change a little bit?
It changed a little bit, but it's still along the same lines. So the next book, so I do have one that's in between. It was for the younger age. It's more of a concept book. It's called Horse the Horsefly. That one is more, talking about animal sounds and just rhyming, trying to get a child to learn some sight words. So that one is more, I guess that is like the off book, and there'll be several more. But again, that's just to start getting towards that educational piece, and it's to allow those younger children who may not sit down, like my daughter who's 3, she may not sit down throughout a whole Crow from the Shadow story, but when I pull up Horse the Horsefly, we will sit there and do animal sounds for the next 30-45 minutes. So the last one, the one that's coming out in mid-February of this year, 2022, that one is the message in that book is pretty simple. It's never ever forget your worth. I think I put it in there a good 3 or 4 times. And in that story, you have a star. Now, this is a little different from Crow. This star knows his worth. He knows that he's important. He knows that he has this great event coming up. He's excited about it, and he's going to knock it out of the park. He knows that he is the center of attraction. That's the difference between him and Crow. But then he meets this bully, right? And this bully plays a trick on him on one of the biggest nights of his life, right? He plays this trick, and now the star is starting to, feel a little bit less worthy of being the center of attraction. And he's going through the story now. He's starting to feel a little bit more of that depression that we've talked about. He's starting to feel like an outcast. People are making fun of him, and that's why I think the star is starting to relate a little bit more to Crow. And as you can see, this is the star. This is Billy Dipper there. You see how vibrant he is on the cover. But as you go throughout the story, you'll see him now a little bit more like Crow from the Shadow, who is in the beginning, he's actually standing in the shadow. And Billy Dipper, on the flip side, he falls into the shadow because of an event that happened in his life. Insert COVID, for example. So what he had after he fell into the shadow, into his own shadow, he realized his parents, and this again, me trying to encourage parents to be involved. His parents noticed something, and they started trying to invest in his life, start talking to him. And they provided him a story, and you'll see as we read through it, they provided him something. He was able to read it for himself, internalize it for himself. But more importantly, when the bully was in trouble, he was able to go save the bully. And then the bully realized that he had those same kind of self-doubts, those same kind of emotions. But Billy Dipper, who's the main attraction, he was able to give the message to him to say, hey, you know what? You always have a purpose. You always contribute something to those around you. So never, ever forget your worth. You don't have to be a bully. You don't have to make fun of other people. Just never forget your worth, because you do bring value to those around you. Now, the purpose of the story, again, the message in there is never forget your worth, but also have in there a message about bullying. Because anytime we talk about bullying, I think it's important that we point out that bullying is real. Bullying does happen on a day-to-day basis. And because of our COVID environment, sometimes we don't even realize how much bullying is even happening online. It's increased over time, vice decreasing. You would think that, you're online, maybe you could be a big scary guy if you wanted to be. But instead, somehow people still find a way to bully online. And in some cases, it's even worse. Because you put everything online that you want to shine, right? You see everything that you want to be online, you can create that. And then you have somebody who's coming and knocking even that down. I think sometimes that becomes even worse than bullying in person. So in that book, we actually put, of course, continue the conversation questions. And some of the questions revolve around bullying. And then some of them revolve around, just understanding your net worth and what things you provide to others. So those how those books really coincide. They overlap in some cases. All in all, it's still saying that you control your own destiny. And I think that was the reason I released that book first, Crew from the Shadow, is to allow people to understand that there's nothing that can stop you. And then as we start working through all these other books, like Billy Dipper's Time to Shine, now we start to talk a little bit more about self-worth and taking inventory of the things that you can do and the things that you provide to those around you.
And I also like how the message is to a bully. The reason why people bully is because they're lacking their self-worth. And to be able to have another child or individual to see that and be able to help and tap into is absolutely huge.
Exactly.
So your books have a lot of tips and strategies. Is there like one thing that we can take away that you could let the parents know that's really, really powerful at this moment for parents to help their kids, or even for the parents to help themselves?
Right. I think for me, the most powerful thing, and I said this about any book that I write, the most powerful thing that we can do for our children is sit down with them and listen. I think, at least that's the first step. Sit down with them, listen, understand them, understand that they have, like we talked about before, they have emotions, they have feelings, but we have to invest that time with them. We have to sometimes get away from the things that we think. Let me tell you, I have to segue here because though I'm a musician, I have rhythm. I just do not dance. I can't dance well, right? I'm too stiff for something. I don't really know what it is, but I am not a good dancer. I can have rhythm. I can be on beat, but I just can't do. I watch people and I've tried to replicate it. It didn't work out. Yet I find myself dancing with specifically my oldest daughter. Why? Because I realize those are the things that she enjoys doing. And I find myself having to, in order to relate to her, sometimes you have to do the things that they do. You can't always bring them to the table and think that a lecture is going to work. In fact, very rarely do I believe a lecture is going to work. It didn't work for me, for sure. I'll give another example. My dad, who I talked about earlier, one thing that I did in my rebellious stage, which I call my rebellious stage, I was 16, 17, and I knew everything there was to know about anything. And I was grown too. I was making $30 a Sunday playing the bass guitar at church, and I thought now I could pay bills and I was an adult. And one thing that I did is I grew a mohawk, and it was the ugliest mohawk that anybody could ever have. But in my mind, it was cool, and I wanted it. My dad absolutely hated it, and there was no lecture that he can give me that could connect to it. It wasn't until that he started talking about things that I related to. He said, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" He said, and I started talking about these great ambitions, how I wanted to be a Marine officer, and I wanted to be a CEO of a Fortune 500 company. And I actually did work at Tyson. But anyway, I wanted to be a CEO of a Fortune 500 company and all of these kind of things. And he says, "Oh, that's awesome. How many of them have hair the way that you have?" And, for me in that moment, it sort of just like hit me like a ton of bricks. It was like, wow, that's pretty, that was like the one thing when he just connected with me. He said he doesn't remember talking about that, but that was like the one thing that he sort of connected with me on, because he knew the things that interest me. And he knew that I wouldn't intentionally, and I'm not saying CEOs can't have mohawks. That's not the message. But what I'm saying is he knew that I intentionally wouldn't have something that wouldn't portray myself or have an appearance that wouldn't align with my future goals. And so because he knew that and he was able to relate to me, we were able to move past the mohawk phase, and of course there's plenty more mistakes that I made. But that was just one example of, a parent seeing their child trying many different other ways, and then finally sitting back and saying, okay, what things really interest him? And then starting to talk through those things and realizing, okay, well, that's what actually works, sitting down, relating to the child. And last thing, I told people, I would much rather not sell a book if children are just going to take it off the shelf and read it by themselves. This is a resource for parents, teachers, and mentors to actually sit down with their children. Of course, I want the children to be engaged and love to pull the book and read it. But again, it's an opportunity to sit down and read to those children, or read with them. You don't have to read to them, but read with them. See what they're enjoying. See what they like about the story. See what they don't like about stories. See what TV shows they like. It's just because there's so many influences out there. So we have a choice. We have to either combat those influences, or we're going to collaborate with those influences. And we can't say that we're going to just be in the middle, because there's no such thing. Inaction is the same as an action. You're making a decision to collaborate with those influences, vice combat them. and which may or may not be the right answer. So I think for me, with all the resources available, I think the first step is just sitting down with your children, investing time with them, getting to know them, right? The same way that you'll get to know, I think we're talking about the dating app, the same way you'll get to know somebody who's on a dating app, get to know your children. And the thing is they change, right? I have a 12-year-old girl. For one, I never thought I'd have girls, but I do have 2 of them now. And for me, I started looking, it's like, man, when did you start liking, when did you start liking this? When did you start liking that? What show is this you're watching? When do we start liking these things? We were just at Chuck E. Cheese and now we're doing these things. So it's getting to know the child, getting to know your children is just so important, and spending time with them, investing, building that true relationship, that true bond with them. I think it's the first step. So that way, what things that they need. You're able to feed them better when you know what foods they need and what they like. I can't feed my son peanuts, for example, because he's allergic, right? It's the same thing with the mental health. I can't feed them things that I know are not going to work for them. I can't feed them things that I know they're going to completely reject. I have to feed them things that work for them, that helps them to grow and develop and become better human beings.
Absolutely. So you said some pretty powerful tools there, especially I like how you said about connection. Connection is absolutely huge, especially with the mental health going around. We need to connect. My thing is, blame, shame shuts the brain. So even if we start, lecturing our children, it shuts our brain down so that we're not getting that connection at all. So that is huge, because that is probably one of the biggest steps, is getting the connection. So you have a lot of great learning tools there, because besides the connection is also being able to self-reflect and be able to also not only just self-reflect, I like how you said about the bullying, is be able to also have empathy for the other person. So this has been a wonderful, wonderful interview. There's so much powerful need in those books for parents and educators and children. And I also like how you said, well, I don't want just the children just to read the book. Need to be reading with the children and engaging with them and teaching them. So it is a huge, huge learning tool, a teaching tool, I should say, for parents, educators, and for the children. So if for people to try to get a hold of you, where could we find you?
So first of all, I'm on all the social media platforms. Well, let me rephrase. I'm not on all the social media platforms. I said that so nonchalantly and then realized I'm not. So let's start. So I'm on LinkedIn, first name, last name, and same thing with Facebook. You can find me in those ways. I'm on Instagram. It's Captain ONO06. But the easiest way to find me is to go to my website and just hit contact. And my website is www.parent-child-connect.com. That's it, parent-child-connect.com. That's the easiest way to find me. You just go to contact. You enter in the information, I'll receive an email, and then we'll just connect that way. And I think that's the best way to get to know me. That's the best way to read a lot of the blogs and information I put out there. And I always try to push resources to parents, specifically parents, teachers, and mentors. And of course, if children want to read and learn some, they can. But my resources I provide on the website, other than the books, are specifically for parents and adults to sort of grow and be encouraged and know that there's a hope. There is hope out there in this environment that seems hopeless at times.
Yeah, exactly. And we're not alone in our journey. So
exactly.
This has been a really great interview with you. I've really enjoyed talking with you, and I'm definitely going to get together again.
Absolutely. I look forward to it.
This platform.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. It's such a fun time to get to talk. And thank you so much for reaching out. This has been an excellent opportunity, and I definitely look forward to working with you in the future.
Oh, I do too. Well, you take care, and we'll connect again later. Take care.
All right. You too.